Okay, so today we're diving into, well, let's be honest, one of those thinkers who kind of shakes you up a bit, right?
Definitely.
Friedrich Nietzsche. And we've been digging into this Portuguese text called A Mente de Nietzsche. Yeah,
Wow.
it's pretty intense. But we wanted to bring you like the core of what he was getting at, because his ideas, they can be tough to get through sometimes, but they're so worth it.
Yeah.
Our goal here is to make Nietzsche like actually understandable,
Yeah.
and show why he still matters so much today.
Exactly. So we're not going to just do the usual, like, here's his life, here's what he wrote. We want to really get into those big ideas, see how they connect to each other.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe even to our own lives, right?
Absolutely. How we see the world, the whole shebang.
So, so, all right, let's start with the basics. Nietzsche born in 1844. And right away, there's this interesting thing. His dad was a pastor,
Hmm.
which is like kind of surprising when you think about where Nietzsche ends up.
Yeah.
He was incredibly smart, like a brilliant student. He focused on philology.
He's a philologist.
Yeah, the study of language, literature, how it all works.
Oh, okay.
He actually became a professor at like a really young age in Basel.
Yeah.
But his health, oh man, it was just awful. He had to retire early. And of course, you can't talk about Nietzsche without talking about Richard Wagner,
Oh,
the
yeah.
composer. Their relationship was like super intense and it ended really badly. But, Nietzsche wasn't just a philosopher like sitting in a room thinking all day.
Right.
He was also a musician, a poet, a writer. He was engaged with the world in so many different ways.
That's so crucial that he was involved in all these different areas. He wasn't just theorizing from afar. He was right there in the mix.
Exactly. And that really shapes how he thinks, especially when we get to his ideas about truth. Because here's where it gets really interesting. Nietzsche basically says what we think of as truth, like this solid objective thing, it's not really out there. He sees it as a multitude of metaphors and metonymies, which basically means like human-made ideas that we've just accepted as facts. He even says we only ever see the effects of natural laws, not the laws themselves. So like what we call truth, it might just be a really, really convincing story we all agree on.
That's mind-blowing. It makes you wonder about everything, right?
Right. And he contrasts this with art. He thought that cultivating this artistic force could help us see through those illusions.
Yeah.
He even saw the world itself, how we experience it, as a work of art, of the senses and the intellect.
Mm-hmm.
So we're actually creating our reality in a way.
That's a huge responsibility.
Yeah, it is. And so if truth isn't this fixed thing, then how do we even think about knowledge?
Good question.
Well, for Nietzsche, knowledge wasn't about finding this ultimate truth. It was way more practical, like almost a tool. He saw knowing as a way to gain potency.
Potence.
Yeah, like power, the ability to actually do things, to shape things, to make a difference.
I see.
He was really critical of what he called the humanization of the world.
What's that?
This idea that we project our own values, our human perspective onto everything. Like we assume the universe thinks like we do,
Oh, right, right.
And he even went after Kant.
Kant, the philosopher.
Yeah. Now, Nietzsche actually respected Kant in a lot of ways. But Kant believed in these things called synthetic a priori judgments, which are basically like things you can know to be true before you even experience the world.
Interesting.
And Nietzsche questioned why that should be our goal,
Hmm.
especially if truth isn't really this stable thing to begin with.
He's shaking things up again.
Right. Okay, now let's go back to Wagner for a minute. Because this relationship is a wild ride, and it really affected how Nietzsche thought. At first, they were close. Nietzsche was like a huge fan. This was partly because of Schopenhauer, another philosopher they both liked. Nietzsche even called Wagner's estate his home and refuge. And there was this really strong connection with Wagner's wife, Cosima, maybe even like a romantic thing on Nietzsche's part.
Wow, so it was a deep connection.
Yeah, very deep. But then it all fell apart. Nietzsche became super disillusioned with Wagner, especially as Wagner became more popular and, in Nietzsche's view, embraced Christianity with his opera Parsifal.
So Nietzsche saw it as a betrayal.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
He felt like Wagner was selling out, catering to the masses. He even said he dreaded those evenings with Wagner, like he
Yeah.
couldn't stand to be there anymore.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just personal. This falling out led to Nietzsche writing stuff like Nietzsche contra Wagner. He criticized Wagner for, and I'm quoting here, caressing every Buddhist instinct and embellishing it with music, and for embracing every form of Christianity and decadence. Basically, Nietzsche was moving toward this philosophy that celebrates life and strength. And he saw Wagner as, like, wallowing in pessimism and weakness.
Oh, wow.
Meanwhile, Nietzsche himself was going through some really difficult stuff. Like, his health was terrible. He spent years traveling all over Europe trying to feel better. He was so isolated
Yeah.
and often struggling financially, too. And he made this decision to reject traditional spiritual truths. He called what he was writing his bloody truths.
Bloody truths.
Yeah, like really raw and unflinching. And out of all this comes this iconic figure, Zarathustra.
Oh, yeah.
He described it in a poem. He was under Apollo, it was winter, and one became two, and Zarathustra passed by me. Now, this is the original Zarathustra, the prophet.
Right, right.
This is Nietzsche's own creation, a character who speaks for his later ideas. Interestingly, Wagner died around the time Nietzsche finished the first part of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and publishing it was a nightmare. He ended up paying for the last part himself, and only 40 copies were printed. He barely had any friends left to even send them to.
That's really sad.
Yeah, it is. And then the tragedy, right? The descent into madness, 1889, in Turin, he has this mental breakdown. There's this famous story, might be more legend than fact, about him seeing a coachman whipping a horse and just collapsing.
Oh, wow.
And when his friend Overbeck came to see him, Nietzsche was completely gone. He was saying he was the successor to the dead god, the buffoon of eternity, signing letters as Dionysus and the Crucified One. It was like a break from reality.
That's heartbreaking. And what's so fascinating but also sad is how his physical health might have been connected to all this.
Yeah.
He'd been sick for years using all sorts of substances, opium, chloral, maybe to deal with the pain.
Yeah.
And then he was diagnosed with progressive cerebral paralysis. So it was really serious.
Yeah. And then his sister enters the picture. And this is where things get really messed up. Elizabeth Nietzsche.
Right.
After Nietzsche's breakdown, she took control of his writings. And she basically twisted them, manipulated them to fit her own beliefs.
Her own beliefs.
Yeah, she was like proto-fascist, anti-Semitic.
Oh, no.
Yeah. It's really disturbing because she completely distorted his philosophy to push her own agenda. It's a reminder of how easily ideas can be misused, you know?
Yeah, it's frightening.
And it's so important to understand that Nietzsche himself was not anti-Semitic. He actually wrote, "The fight against the Jews has always been a sign of a low, envious, and cowardly nature."
So it's crucial to be careful about those secondary interpretations, right?
Absolutely. Especially when there's a clear agenda there. Always go back to the original sources.
Yeah.
Okay, so concepts. Probably the most famous one and definitely the most misunderstood is the will to power. Now, this wasn't meant to be some strict, rule book or anything. It was more like a set of ideas that kept developing, evolving around certain themes. And to really get it, this text says you have to look at his notes, his unpublished work, not just the finished books.
So we need to, use his own way of thinking to understand him.
Exactly. Because he was always questioning everything, so we can't go in with our own preconceived notions,
Right, right.
Which brings up this really tricky question. How do we even interpret someone whose mind, ultimately broke down? Does that invalidate his earlier work?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
There's been a lot of debate about why his mental health collapsed. Was it syphilis? Something else. But Nietzsche himself actually had some really interesting, even provocative thoughts on illness and decadence. Like he said, the sick and the weak have more spirit.
More spirit. That seems, counterintuitive.
Right. How can being sick or weak give you more spirit?
Yeah.
Well, he saw illness, in a way, as a challenge that could lead to greater strength and understanding. He said, it is only a question of strength to possess all the morbid traits of the century, but to compensate them internally with an exuberant force of construction and restoration. So even disease could be a tool if you overcome it.
Wow, that's a powerful way to think about it.
Yeah, it is. And this text breaks down Nietzsche's philosophical journey into 3 stages. The first one is called aesthetic pessimism.
Okay, what's that all about?
Well, this early phase was really influenced by Schopenhauer and also by Nietzsche's engagement with Greek tragedy. Like recognizing the suffering in life, but finding a way to deal with it, even find beauty in it through art.
So it's not all doom and gloom.
Right. Then the second stage is critical intellectualism with scientific inspiration. So he's getting more analytical, influenced by science. And he starts to deconstruct, take apart all these traditional beliefs, morality, religion, metaphysics. He's questioning the foundation of Western thought.
He's really going for it.
Yeah, he is. And then the final stage is the Dionysian conception of the world.
Dionysian, like the god of wine and partying.
Exactly. But in a philosophical sense.
Yeah.
This is where Nietzsche embraces life even more, sees the world as this constant interplay of creation and destruction. This is where the Übermensch comes in, and the idea of eternal return.
Okay, those are big ones. We need to get into those.
We will.
Yeah.
But first, let's talk about nihilism, because this seems to be the core problem that Nietzsche is trying to address in this later phase.
Right.
So what did he mean by nihilism? It's basically the devaluation of all the values we hold dear, the loss of any real purpose or meaning in life. He saw it as this kind of spiritual sickness spreading through modern society, that feeling that nothing really matters.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can relate to that feeling.
Definitely. And he analyzed this decadence by looking at what he called the decline of the warrior spirit.
The warrior spirit.
Yeah, it's this attitude of like actively engaging with the world, not focusing on some supposed otherworldly reality that makes this life seem less important. He criticized traditional metaphysics for doing that, for focusing on abstract ideas instead of the here and now. And he also criticized what he called slave morality.
Okay, what's that?
He argued that this was a value system created by people who felt powerless and resentful. They couldn't experience the world in a powerful or virtuous way, so they invented this idea of an afterlife and a system of values that praised weakness, humility, suffering, like a reversal of the traditional aristocratic values of strength and excellence.
So how do we get out of this nihilism trap?
Nietzsche's answer was a transvaluation of all values. Basically, we need to reevaluate and recreate our values, move beyond the Judeo-Christian framework, which he saw as life-denying. It's about fighting against resentment, guilt, and these ascetic ideals that prioritize spiritual stuff over living in this world.
So like rewriting the rules of the game.
Exactly. And this journey of reevaluation is embodied by Zarathustra. He goes off searching for new perspectives, meeting all sorts of characters along the way.
Journey of self-discovery.
Yeah, and it represents our own struggle to overcome nihilism and find meaning in a world that doesn't give us any easy answers. It's clear that Nietzsche's ideas have been hugely influential, especially for existentialists and psychologists.
Absolutely. His ideas about individual freedom and responsibility, about creating your own meaning, they've really resonated with people.
Now, as we wrap up, it's important to remember Nietzsche's legacy is complicated. This text emphasizes that his work is unfinished and, honestly, kind of messed up by his illness and his sister's meddling. So interpreting him is really difficult.
Yeah, and we have to be aware of how, cultural trends and biases have affected how we see him. It's so important to separate what he actually said from how his ideas have been used and misused over time.
Right. One key takeaway here is Nietzsche's argument that nihilism comes from this kind of metaphysical thinking, this belief in a separate, higher reality that ends up devaluing our earthly existence. He thought we need to move past that to really overcome nihilism.
He saw modern angst as coming from a life that feels meaningless, absurd. And what's interesting is he argued that even people who reject God, who call themselves free thinkers, often haven't really broken free from that Christian worldview. They still cling to the same moral framework.
And the will to power, as we talked about. It's not about dominating others. It's about this fundamental drive in life, this desire to grow, to overcome, to create your own values in a world without objective truth. And the eternal return, this idea of living your life over and over again, it's not necessarily a literal thing. It's more like a way to affirm life, to live so fully that you'd be willing to experience it all again.
Yeah, like a challenge to really embrace every moment.
Exactly. And then there's the Übermensch, this ideal human that Nietzsche envisioned. It's not about racial superiority like his sister tried to claim. It's about someone who overcomes themselves, embraces all of life, creates their own values, and moves beyond nihilism and what he called the last man, who just wants comfort and security.
So the Übermensch is like a master of themselves, someone who says yes to everything life throws at them.
Right. And Nietzsche's philosophy is ultimately a call to reevaluate everything, to find a new way of living. He thought society tries to domesticate us, make us conform. And he was offering a different path, one of constant growth and self-overcoming.
He wanted us to be creators, not just followers.
Exactly. So here's a final thought to leave you with. How can we take these really challenging ideas from Nietzsche and apply them to our own lives? In a world that often feels meaningless, how do we overcome our own forms of nihilism and live more authentically by creating our own values? It's a tough question, but it's one that Nietzsche himself struggled with throughout his whole life. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thank you.
Guys, see you in another podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel.